Welcome to my kitchen here at Trails End 62. Today I'm going to be making bread. Now it's not normal bread, although I have made normal bread. This is called pan, which is Spanish for bread. When I was a little younger, when I was a lot younger, my dad was in the Air Force. We lived in Spain, and over in Spain, and every village around had a panaderia, which is a bread bakery, where they made bread, and there you would go and they'd make these little loaves of bread that you could buy. And I tell you what, it's some of the best bread I ever ate. So I remembered that, and I found a recipe from Spain on how to make Spanish bread. Now I've made this bread from scratch, and it takes a while to make because you have to be real careful with the kneading of it and the rising of it and the kneading of it and the rising of it and all that kind of good stuff, which is good. And traditionalist, they'll say that's the only way to make it. And I've made it that way, and it's good, and I like it that way. It takes a long time. So I decided, since I have two bread machines, actually I have three bread machines, that I would try making some pan in a bread machine. Now it's got a dough cycle to it. And I've tried it on my different bread machines, and I've got this one here that I like the best. So I take my Spanish bread recipe, my Spanish pan recipe, and I'm going to make pan in a bread machine. That makes the dough, and then you still have to cook it in the oven. So it doesn't do the cooking in the bread machine like regular bread in the bread machine would. It's just going to be dough. But I don't have to mess with all the process of it. The machine takes care of all that. When it's done, I'll just take it out of the machine and divide it up into little segments, put it on some parchment paper, and let it rise for about another 20-30 minutes, and then I'll pop it in the oven and cook it. So it's a lot faster for me because the bread machine does most of the time-consuming work, and you have to do things a certain way in a bread machine. You look at the recipes, and they specifically say in a bread machine recipe that you need to follow putting the ingredients in the machine as it's listed in the recipe. So I found a regular French bread type dough for the bread machine, and the procedure is about the same for a lot of the breads. You put them everything has to be put in a certain order, technically, for it to work right. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to make some pan, Spanish bread, in a bread machine. Now, Spanish bread doesn't use a lot of things that other breads use. We have some basic ingredients. Let's go over those. Now, the basic recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of bread yeast. And I keep my yeast in the refrigerator. Keep it refrigerated, kind of keeps it dormant, and then I'll take it out beforehand and let it get up to room temperature. 1 tablespoon of bread yeast and 1.5 cups of warm water is the regular recipe, but for the bread machine I found that it actually needs a little less water. The dough is really too sticky, so I use 1.25 cup of warm water in the bread machine, and I just heat that up in the microwave. Takes 3.5 cups of flour. Bread flour is better. All-purpose flour works, but I use bread flour because we used to make a lot of bread, so we have a lot of bread flour, but it seems to work best for this, so that's what I use. Then it takes 1 teaspoon of salt and 1/8 cup of extra virgin olive oil. And that's all it takes to put in there. Now you have to put them in a certain order, and we'll show you what that is. First thing we do is we put in the 1.5, or in this case 1.25 cup of warm water. Put that in our bread machine bowl. Then the second thing it requires is 1 teaspoon of salt. So I'll use my teaspoon here by 1/8 of a cup of olive oil. I'll get my 1/8 of a cup out here. So we have our extra virgin olive oil, 1/8 of a cup, and we put that in our pan. And that's going to be followed by 3½ cups of flour. Now, the one thing you have to remember about flour to get precise measurements is you don't want to pack flour in. Flour needs to be stirred up and aerated so it gets nice and fluffy. So you stir it up before you actually measure it out. You don't pack it in, you don't pack it down or anything like that, stamp it or anything like that. You have to stir it up so it gets air in there fluffy for your accurate measurement, because that's how flour is measured. And then we're going to get 3 cups of flour. Now we start by just dipping that in and just dropping it in there. And we drop it in our measuring cup, being careful not to pack it in. Just drop it in there, and then when it gets up high enough, then you just simply take and just kind of level it off across the top so it's nice and level, but you don't pack it down. Okay? Alright, that's 1 cup. And now we'll get 2 more, 2½ more. There we have our 3½ cups of flour in there. And the last thing we put in is going to be the yeast. I take my tablespoon of yeast and I just kind of sprinkle it over the top of this. I try not to put it all in one pile. Sprinkle it over the top because it seems to work better to sprinkle it around rather than just pour it in on one pile. And that's our tablespoon of yeast. Then the next thing we'll do is we will put it in our bread machine here, because it's all ready to go. And these bread machines all work different. This one has a turn lock. My other one just pressures down into it. And the third one I haven't used yet, but these are the 2 newest ones here. So I like this one. I've found the dough process on this one seems to work better for making bread. Plug it in here. There we go. I don't know if you can read that or not, but we have a dough right there. So number 8 on this is our dough. So we do our settings here, our cycles, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that'll run about 1 hour and 30 minutes. Start, and there she goes. Okay, now we've got our bread maker started making the dough, and like everything else in life, different brands of bread makers work differently. So I like to check my bread maker after it starts mixing the dough, and after it goes for just a little bit, then I'll look in and check, make sure that it's gathered all the dough and flour and everything into the mix. And so let's look at that and make sure that we've got everything working. Now, as you can see, there is some dough that's not getting mixed. So what I do is I take a little scraper and get it down in there. Try to make sure that we get all the dough mixed in. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now we'll just let it go. Now I don't have to do nothing for 1 hour and 30 minutes. Takes care of itself, except I got to clean up my mess. And then we'll be back and we'll take the dough out and we'll shape it, turn our oven on after we get it set it on there to let it rest. Here we go. I've sprinkled my cutting board with some flour. I'm just going to kind of spread it out here, because this dough is still going to be just a little bit sticky, so a little flour on there doesn't hurt the dough. Take our bread out. bread maker. As you can see, it's nice and plumped up, and we're going to dump it on our cutting board here. And it's still kind of sticky, even though we've decreased the water in it. It's still a very sticky dough. So we've got some on the sides in here. We're going to get out. We get our fingers in some flour, and then we can work it out. We'll add this to our dough ball. All right. Now, one of the keys to this is to work this as little as possible, because you don't want to destroy all the air bubbles that are in it. So we work it as little as possible in order to maintain the air bubbles. I'm just kind of stretching it out here, just very easily. I get it the width that I want it, because that's what I'm going to make my cuts from. Try to get it even. Doesn't always work. Try to get it even and get it stretched out without interrupting the interior of it too much. If you look real close, you can see we got some air bubbles here. Alright, okay. And then what we'll do is we'll take our cutter and we'll just slice it off. Well, it looks like maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches maybe, I don't know. Whatever you want for your bread to be. I like individual loaves. There I have my cookie sheet covered in parchment paper, and I'll just set these on there as I cut them. And then we'll take these, separate them out. We don't want to work them too much. We don't want to work them too much, but we want to put them on our parchment paper, keeping them separated so they don't grow into each other. I try to keep these uniform, but you know, it doesn't always work. So, besides which, if they're uniform, then they're not unique. And now, as you see, they're ready to go. Got them sitting on my oven top here, my stove top, and I'm going to set my oven at 450 degrees. Start it. Now I put it here on my stove top because it's kind of like a proving oven, and the heat from the oven will come out here as the oven's heating up. So I'll do this for 30 minutes or 20 minutes to start with. I'll do it on this side for 20 minutes, and then after 20 minutes I'll turn this, because it's heating up, I'll turn this around and put this side here up against where the warm air is coming out underneath the vents here, for another 10 minutes. So 30 minutes total on the rise time as it's rising, and that'll go for 30 minutes as the oven's heating up. Now the oven will heat up quicker than the 30 minutes naturally, but I do this because it's kind of a proving oven and helps them rise better and makes it all good. Alright, we'll come back in 30 minutes, pop them in the oven. Alright, there you can see their 30 minutes are up. You can see they have risen quite a bit, and so we will now pop them in our oven at 450 degrees for 20 to 25 minutes. Now it's going to vary depending on the size of your loaves. And these are basically smaller loaves, and as you can see they're not all uniform, even though I tried. Some of them are, but there's my hand. So you can see that's just a hand. That's just about as big as the loaf is, and some of them are a little smaller. See, that one there's a little smaller. This one's a little thinner. But basically we'll put them in the oven. I'll probably do these 23 minutes based on my the size of them and the experience I've had doing it. And then I'll test them, and by testing them I'll take them out and tap on the bottom of them. The bottom should be hard and sound a bit hollow when you tap them, kind of like a watermelon, but not exactly. And then we'll pop them in our oven for 23 minutes. And here we are. I like to take these and turn them over and just kind of tap on the bottom. Hear that? So, nice and golden brown. They've got a little flour dust on them, but that's okay. Okay, they cooled a little bit. Crack one open here. Tasted it nice and warm. It's good. It's, as I can say, like I remembered it, but hey, it was the late 60s since I last tasted an authentic Spanish pan, so considering it's been that long, this being 2021, it's been a while. Still, it's good. I like it. Works for me. Spanish pan from a bread machine. It's not traditional, it's not perfect as the traditional make it, and some traditionists might look at it and say, well, that's not pan, but hey, you just got to make do with what you got to work with, right? There you go. From my kitchen to yours. God bless.